Hey guys, imagine waking up before dawn. Your maid brings you a bowl filled not with fragrant oils, but with a pungent stench of fermented urine stashed overnight. Yes, urine, and you're expected to douse your face with it. Now picture sitting in a marble bathtub slathered in lead-white paste, praying that the luxurious glow doesn't poison you. Sound horrifying? That's just a taste of what we're uncovering today. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. It's the height of the Roman Empire, and atop the marble pillars of power sit the empresses and noblewomen whose beauty rituals set the standards for the entire civilized world. But beneath the veneer of silk robes and perfumed corridors lay secrets so revolting that even the bravest gossip columns of antiquity dared barely whisper them. Today, we unlock the doors of imperial boudoirs and bathhouses to reveal the disgusting hygiene habits of royal women in the Roman Empire. Part 1. The Bathhouse Ritual, from sweet scents to toxic sludge. In the public imagination, Roman baths conjure images of opulent thermal rooms, steam-filled domes, and polished statues gleaming under frescoed ceilings. For the imperial family, the private bathhouse was the epicenter of daily life, and also the stage for some of the most revolting practices in personal hygiene. Early each morning, the empress would summon her cadre of female attendants to prepare her bath. The water itself was often recycled. During the reign of Augustus, the baths drew from aqueducts that fed hundreds of public and private facilities. By the time the empress's private tub was filled, the water had passed through multiple hands, multiple bodies, and dozens of perspiring garments. Mercury and metal salts from bronze pipes sometimes tinted the pool a sickly green, an unintended beauty hack said to tighten the skin. But recycled sweat was just the beginning. To cleanse off the grime of a day spent behind velvet drapes, the empress would be anointed with a thick paste made from ground pumice and pumice-laced olive oil. Her maids would then scrape the mixture off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. This ritual exfoliation removed dirt, and with it countless parasitic lice and nits clinging to the skin. The strigil's edge, dulled by constant use, sometimes nicked the skin, leaving tiny wounds that guaranteed any germs present had direct entry. Next came the application of perfumes so potent they could induce headaches in anyone with a healthy nose. Roman perfumers boiled down flowers, resins, and spices, rose petals, myrrh, cedar, and frankincense, into concentrated oils. Wealthy women slathered their bodies in these concoctions, from the nape of the neck to the soles of their feet. The result was an aroma that mingled with the underlying tang of damp masonry, rotting wood beams, and ancient sewage lines, creating an atmosphere as intoxicating as it was nauseating. Yet, the most grotesque secret of the bathhouse lay hidden in alabaster jars on marble shelves, the notorious face-whitening paste. Comprised largely of white lead carbonate, animal fat, and perhaps a drop of vinegar, this cosmetic promised the pale complexion fashionable among aristocrats. Day after day, empresses layered it on, unaware that the lead slowly poisoned their bodies. Swollen jaws, tooth loss, and neurological decay were the price of beauty. Even so, royal women considered these symptoms an acceptable trade-off for the unmistakable prestige of chalk-white skin. While the paste solidified on their cheeks, maids would braid hair rinsed with ash-infused water, a primitive dry shampoo, if you will. The alkaline ash absorbed grease but left strands brittle. To tame them, women twisted locks into tight buns wrapped in cloth, a practice that could lead to traction alopecia. Not exactly the luscious tresses depicted on coinage. Part 2. The lavatory, communal thrones, and the art of concealment. When nature called, the imperial palace did not retreat to private porcelain thrones like our modern toilets. Instead, royalty and retinue alike perched upon stone benches with holes cut in them, arranged around a shared trough of flowing water. There was no stall door, no scented candle, only the echo of clattering sandals and hushed conversations. For an empress accustomed to both grandeur and secrecy, this communal convenience could be mortifying. To avoid detection and potential scandal if a rival courtier recognized her posture, she might send a trusted maid ahead to claim a remote corner of the bench. She'd then squat behind a curtain of embroidered silk, hoping that the noise of rushing water and ornamental fountains masked her presence. Waste itself flowed through lead-lined sewers that carried it away, mingling human excrement with the detritus of animal carcasses, vegetable remnants, and industrial runoff. Occasionally, toxic runoff would backflow into basins and basins of the palace cisterns, leading to outbreaks of deadly diseases. Yet the Empress and her ladies-in-waiting continued their ritually shared pit stop, convinced of its hygiene thanks to the ever-present rush of water. Part 3. The Unmentionable, Menstrual Management and Frank Conversations. Menstruation, the most natural of bodily functions, was shrouded in superstition, and managed with methods that modern viewers would find utterly abhorrent. Royal women could not simply slip into a sanitary napkin. Instead, they relied on makeshift tampons crafted from lint, wool, or carefully folded linen. Soaked in wine or vinegar, supposedly to neutralize odor, these plugs were inserted internally and left in place for hours at a time. The result? A breeding ground for bacteria that could turn a simple period into a potentially life-threatening infection. On the rare occasions when an empress needed relief from cramps or mood swings, she consumed concoctions brewed by palace physicians. These could include a mixture of crushed hellebore, mandrake root, and opium, an effective painkiller but also a hallucinogen. Under its influence, she might drift in and out of consciousness, unaware that the potent brew was suppressing not just pain, but her heart rate and respiratory function as well. In private, the royal women shared frank conversations about these discomforts, exchanging tips on which cloth strips were most absorbent, which herbs stung less when bound against the skin, and which secret passages behind palace walls offered discreet relief when a tampon needed changing. To outsiders, the very notion of discussing menstrual blood was taboo, but within their gilded chambers, these women forged a sisterhood bonded by the most intimate of bodily processes. Part 4. The Farce of Fragrance, Scented Secrets and Foul Failures. For all the elaborate perfumes and incense burned in temple-like diffuser pots, the Roman nose was no stranger to truly foul aromas. Imperial women carried personal pomanders, small metal cages filled with mixtures of dried flowers, ambergris, and chalk, to mask the stench of sweat and sewage. At banquets, they discreetly sniffed from these pouches, believing the perfume dust could ward off miasmas or evil air. Yet these portable scent guards often backfired. Ambergris, a precious secretion from whale intestines, smelled sweet on its own, but turned rancid when mixed with body heat and humidity. Likewise, the rose oil so prized by courtiers could ferment in the day's heat, giving off a sour, sickly perfume that made the nose wrinkle in disgust. Instead of masking odors, these pomanders sometimes announced them with greater clarity. Part 5. Sleeping Arrangements, Sheets, Pestilence, and the Pestilent Bedchamber. After a day spent in lead-tainted makeup, communal latrines, and pestilent pomanders, the royal household still had to return to the bedchamber, where yet another slew of hygiene horrors awaited. The imperial bed was raised on a wooden frame, topped with feather-stuffed mattresses swathed in linen, but those feathers came from geese, ducks, or sometimes tamed swans, harvested not through humane plucking, but by slaughter. The carcasses were tossed aside. The empress got the prize, downy stuffing. Yet no matter how finely stitched the sheets, they quickly became repositories for dust mites, lice, and most notoriously, bed bugs. These tiny parasites feasted on the royal blood at night, leaving red welts across the skin. To combat them, women smeared their sheets with a mixture of cedar oil, pitch, and animal fat. The scent might repel some insects, but at the cost of leaving the linen stiff and greasy. Even worse, the bedchamber walls were thick stone that absorbed moisture, encouraging mold growth in hidden corners. Painters would decorate the walls with colorful frescoes, but behind them lay damp patches crawling with mycelia. An empress who prized her porcelain complexion would find patchy green stains climbing the walls, stains that released spores she inhaled as she slept, risking lifelong respiratory troubles. And so, the imperial dawn breaks over marble columns streaked with mildew, and our noble women rise from beds both luxurious and loathsome. But the horrors of hygiene in the Roman Empire did not end at the threshold of the bedroom. As the empress prepared to face another day of political intrigue, religious observance, and, most critically, maintaining her appearance, her attendants quietly readied a fresh ensemble of revolting rituals, breakfast of champions and corpses. Before the sun had fully climbed the sky, a low murmur resonated through the palace kitchens as cooks began slaughtering newly delivered game. Rabbits, pheasants, and peacocks, captured hours earlier, were dispatched with ceremonial flourish. Their blood, still warm, would be collected in earthenware jugs for deglazing cauldrons and enriching sauces. For the empress, the first meal of the day was less about pleasure and more about perfuming her digestive tract. Her morning porridge, known as poles, was a tepid mash of spelt or barley boiled in lukewarm water. To this unappetizing base, palace chefs stirred zest-laden oils pressed from the earliest olives, and on especially lavish occasions, a generous dollop of garum, the fermented fish sauce that conquered palates from Britain to Egypt. Garum's pungent aroma soared through hallways like a banshee's wail, and swallowing it was a test of fortitude worthy of gladiators. Yet the empress insisted on at least a sip. In aristocratic circles, only the most refined could stomach garum undiluted. Even more revolting was the frequent addition of crushed animal brains to thickened porridges. Not for taste, brains have the consistency of soft custard, but for perceived brain-boosting properties. Physicians touted them as the ultimate memory aid, a rumor eagerly seized upon by an empress determined never to forget a single Senate decree. The cosmetic cabinet of horrors. Once breakfast concluded, amid a symphony of chamber pots being dumped into cesspits, the empress retreated to her private dressing room. Here, a sprawling array of cosmetic jars awaited, alabaster pots of kohl, urns of charcoal, and amphorae of ochre pigments. To sculpt her eyebrows into the fashionable unibrow that signified wisdom and nobility, her maidens applied burnt almond soot mixed with animal fat. The soot, harvested from sacrificial fires, often contained smoldering embers that left minute burns along the brow. Tiny scars she wore like medals of status. For her cheeks, the rosy flush of youth was achieved not by berries or plants, but by ground red lead tetroxide mixed with goat grease. This vermilion rouge was so toxic that just one dab could induce nausea, headaches, and progressive anemia. Yet a pale-faced noblewoman without a dab of rouge risked being mistaken for a peasant woman, or, worse, a witch. Her lips received no mercy either. To deepen their hue, the empress's lipstick was concocted from crushed cochineal beetles imported at great expense from Hispania. The scarlet powder was blown into the mouth and, if she was daring, scraped across the gums to stain the inner flesh. This barbaric technique could result in ulcerations or secondary infections if the powders were contaminated. Maternity in the royal womb. Pushing aside the vanity of cosmetics, the empress's next concern was fertility. Bearing an heir was both a sacred duty and a matter of dynastic survival. On this front, hygiene, or the lack thereof, could make the difference between triumph and tragedy. During pregnancy, she was confined to a special birthing chamber lined with straw. Straw was cheap, yes, but disposable. After the baby's birth, the entire pile was quickly burned to avert the evil vapors believed to dwell in stagnant refuse. The empress herself lay half reclined on a wooden couch, supported by dozens of attendants holding her arms, legs, and, if needed, a bowl for liquid of release, the bodily fluids expelled during labor. Postpartum seclusion lasted 40 days, during which she was attended by midwives who used unsterilized tools, bronze scalpels and iron hooks, to cleanse the uterus, a process intended to expel the afterbirth and any residual blood. Without antiseptics or an understanding of germ theory, this procedure often introduced lethal infections, puerperal fever being the most dreaded killer of royal women. To staunch the bleeding, they might apply wool pads soaked in vinegar and myrrh, a scent meant to mask the metallic tang of hemorrhage but incapable of preventing septicemia. Traveling the empire, the grand carriage of contamination. When the empire demanded her presence in distant provinces, be it to oversee grain distributions in Egypt or to bless newly erected temples in Gaul, the empress would embark upon the great imperial litter or carriage. This conveyance, draped in silk and carried by dozens of stoic slaves, was no sanctuary from filth. The chamber pot on board, a gilded basin discreetly stored beneath a removable bench, was emptied only when the litter halted for rest. Until then, the fumes of human waste permeated the enclosed space. Combined with the exacerbating sense of stale perfumes, sweating attendants, and the unwashed fabric of embroidered curtains, the journey became a noxious crucible. Every jolt over uneven roads could splash droplets of filth onto cushions and into the Empress's garments. In early spring, especially when crossing marshlands, the carriage would traverse clouds of miasma, rank exhalations from rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Even the most potent incense burners failed to counteract the stench, leaving the royal entourage praying for wind to disperse the invisible bad air, thought to cause malaria and other maladies. Public appearances, the spectacle of odor. Despite her efforts at masking odors, the Empress's public appearances often turned into aromatic spectacles. At grand processions down the Via Sacra, she and her ladies-in-waiting would walk beneath canopies of perfumed smoke, stirring the incense on lazily swinging thuribles. But as the crowds cheered and the humidity rose, perfumes mingled with sweat, sweat with ancient grime, and all with the underlying decay of stone steps slicked by thousands of trampling feet. The Empress always led the cortege, clad in dyes so expensive they bled color at the first raindrop. Purple robes steeped in Tyrian mollusk secretions glistened like freshly spilled wine, but also reeked of fish oil if stored too long. Her sandals, stitched from leather cured in brine vats, exuded the aroma of pickled ox hides, together with a garbled sense of market stalls, fresh produce, spoiled meats, urine pools used for tanning leather. The public square became a cacophony of smells that dogged her every step. Medical interventions, regal remedies, or royal poison. When illness struck, as it inevitably did, the Empress's medical care was a blend of primitive surgery, humoral theory, and outright quackery. Bloodletting, administered by palace physicians, involved making incisions with bronze lancets and applying leeches. The leeches themselves were often collected from unsanitary fish ponds and carried in small wicker baskets. The slightest misstep in their handling could introduce pathogens directly into her bloodstream. For fevers, remedies included cooling the body with chilled robes soaked in snow and vinegar, an expensive privilege only the royals could afford. These robes would be applied and then rotated out for fresh ones, but the melting snow blended with sweat and body oils, leaving the linens clammy and breeding grounds for bacteria. More exotic cures involved what modern sensibilities would consider barbaric: ingesting powdered rhinoceros horn, believed to neutralize poisons, or wearing bracelets forged from human skull fragments to stave off epilepsy. The presence of bone shards and animal horn in contact with open skin created small abrasions, inadvertently opening portals for infection. The evening reprise, nighttime preparations for another round. As dusk settled and the day's pageantry wound down, the Empress returned to her private chambers to repeat many of the morning's unpleasant routines. Before retiring, she would undergo another excavation of her pores with the strigil, rinse her scalp with more ash water, and reapply the lead-infused face paste. Her nightcap, an ornate silk coif embroidered with gold thread, was pressed into service, though its thick padding trapped sweat against her forehead, fostering cradle cap and folliculitis. On the bedside table, a small alabaster bowl of stale urine awaited, a reputed cure for insomnia, used to wash her eyelids and temples. The ammonia purportedly stimulated the senses back into the waking state, ensuring she didn't oversleep important dawn ceremonies. Ironically, this foul ritual often left her too alert to rest, perpetuating a cycle of fatigue masked only by cosmetics. And so, courtiers whispered as the palace fell silent, "How does she endure such trials?" Their answer: with the divine right of emperors, the stubborn pride of the noble class, and an army of attendants to wipe away the evidence of her suffering. Closing thought for Part 2. Behind every regal visage in the Roman Empire lay a hidden landscape of filth, poisons, and infections. Imperial women might have wielded power over vast territories, but in the domain of personal hygiene, they were powerless against the limitations of contemporary knowledge. Their beauty and status came at the cost of lead poisoning, scabies, and septic fevers. Realities both humiliating and lethal. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll delve into the imperial wardrobe's own hygiene horrors, the scandalous love affairs that spread more than just rumors, and the final descent into the palace funerary rites that prepared even the most powerful women for a death shrouded in ritual and rot. The closet of corruption, fabrics, flies, and filth. By mid-morning, the Empress faced a new ordeal, selecting her daily attire from a wardrobe that was as repulsive as it was ostentatious: silk, linen, and wool, imported from India, Egypt, and Iberia, hung in carved wooden lockers, but their elegance belied a labyrinth of decay. Moth havens, silken folds infused with the sweet musk of rosewater and sometimes camphor, were nonetheless prime real estate for fabric pests. Moth larvae tunneled through threads, leaving behind fine silken casings dotted with droppings. When the Empress drew a gown from its cedar-lined chest, she often shook off a swirl of minute white worms before the fabric settled around her shoulders. Mildew and must, Egypt's fine linens, though prized for their coolness, harbored damp patches from humid Nile air. Any crease or fold trapped moisture, which sprouted fungal colonies invisible to the naked eye. Over weeks, the mildew released spores that settled on the skin, triggering rashes and worst-case scenarios of fungal infections that left red, itchy lesions, symptoms blamed on evil spirits rather than inadequate airing. Perfume as palliative. To mask these odors, the imperial seamstresses sprayed robes with a blend of violet oil and distilled cinnamon. Yet the spices fermented when trapped in the folds, morphing a mouth-watering aroma into an acrid stench that clung to the Empress's skin all day. Courtiers quickly learned to bow low when she passed, lest the bouquet catch in their nostrils. The art of washing a tunic true laundering was a novelty. Fullers, slaves, or freedmen specialized in fabric cleaning took charge of heavily soiled garments, but their vats of stale lye-watering clay often did more harm than good. Alum and clay baths. The Empress's favorite purple-dyed tunic might be rinsed in a basin of water mixed with attapulgite clay. The clay absorbed oil and grime, but also abrased delicate fibers, leaving the garment rough and prone to tearing. This cleaning was often repeated until the color faded or the fabric ripped, at which point the Empress discarded it for a fresh piece. Public Phalonica, humiliation. In public fooleries, workers stamped on drenched togas with their bare feet, agitating them in troughs of fetid water mixed with fermented olive oil. The workers shared the liquid between dozens of garments, so the noble woman's tunic might be penalized by the grime of commoners. The Empress's couriers, awaiting delivery, sometimes stuffed her wardrobe with the damp, fish-scented refuse of lower-class garments, inadvertently passing around the foolery's stench. Emergency spot cleans. For quick cleans, maids applied a paste of crushed chalk and vinegar to small stains, wine dribbles, grease spots from cooking, or sweat patches. This mixture sometimes bleached the fabric or left visible rings of discoloration, forcing the Empress to resign herself to another day of ill-fitting garments or the embarrassment of hidden repair stitches, jewels, sweat, and dermatitis. No imperial ensemble was complete without jewelry, necklaces of pearls, bracelets of gold, and brooches studded with garnets or emeralds. Yet these luxuries amplified odor and skin disorders. Necklace, niches, pearls hung close to the collarbone, a spot notorious for sweat accumulation. As the Empress moved, pearls ground lightly against damp flesh, abrading the skin and creating tiny abrasions. Bacteria bred in these wounds, leading to painful pustules that maids tried to hide with liberal applications of lead-based concealer. Metal allergies, long-term contact with copper-based alloys or nickel traces in gold jewelry triggered contact dermatitis, an itching, weeping rash that spread under bracelets and anklets. Physicians prescribed ointments of crushed snail shells and olive oil, which only served to smear irritating powders deeper into the skin. Gemstone grotesquerie. Certain gems, like malachite, a copper carbonate, when ground into powders for cosmetic use, released toxic dust. Women who favored emerald-like finishes in their eyeshadow found themselves tearing uncontrollably and suffering chronic sinus infections. Secret affairs, not just scandal but spreading disease. While her public image was one of divine poise, behind palace doors the Empress often engaged in clandestine liaisons that carried far more than whispered secrets. Bedfellows of convenience. Emperors and senators alike slipped past the guards under the cover of night. Bedchamber curtains, though thick, shook with the forces inside, and the movement circulated stale air, enhancing perspiration and multiplying skin flora. Venereal plagues. Syphilis had not yet reached its pandemic phase in first-century Rome, but gonorrhea and other sexually transmitted infections were rampant. Without any concept of bacteria, physicians prescribed balsamic washes, mixtures of myrtle, authentic cedar oil, and sometimes acidic vinegar to the genitals. Far from curing the affliction, the acidity corroded sensitive tissues, leading to bleeding, scar tissue, and chronic pelvic pain. Shared instruments. In some intimate rituals, like the application of scented oils, tools such as metal spatulas or sponges were reused between partners. These implements became vectors for infection, conveying pathogen-laden fluids from one aristocrat to another, fueling hidden outbreaks among the ruling class. The Festival of Fumes, public rituals, private reek. Twice a year, in grand spectacles like the Ludi Romani, the Empress led processions and sacrifices parading before thousands of citizens. Yet these public triumphs masked private traumas, sacrificial smoke. Enormous pyres consumed oxen, sheep, and purified game. The acrid smoke, tinged with sulfur from brimstone offerings, rose in dense clouds. The Empress stood downwind, wearing a veil of white linen to shield her face, but it did more to trap soot and ash against her skin than to filter the fumes. Baptism by boar's blood. In certain provinces, live animals were brought before the imperial sedan to receive blessing. Boars, heated by fear, sometimes escaped their handlers, charging at the Empress's litters and spraying a fine mist of blood. The sticky crimson droplets clung to embroidered silks, requiring immediate change of attire, often into fabric just as soiled, and leaving her coated in the metallic scent of animal gore. The slow march to decay, from illness to embalming. As years wore on, the cumulative toll of toxins, infections, and chronic fatigue began to show. The Empress, like all mortals, faced a final macabre ritual, her own embalming and burial. Stroke of the feather. The day she fell gravely ill, perhaps with malaria contracted from Italian marshes or dysentery from tainted water. The first sign was often a seizure. Palace physicians applied leeches to her temples and wrapped her limbs with muscle-sloughing poultices of animal hide blended with heat-inducing mustard seed. When her breathing stilled, a chorus of careful listeners would stand guard, ears pressed to her chest, awaiting the faintest gasp to confirm death. Washing the corpse. Only after certified death did attendants carry her to the funerary chamber. Here, professional embalmers bathed the body in warm water, scented with juniper berries and narcissus flowers, scrubbing away surface grime and skin slough. They then packed the orifices, mouth, nose, ears, genitals, with a mixture of crushed mastic resin, aromatic herbs like rosemary and rue, and shredded linen soaked in pitch. The pitch helped seal the cavities, slowing decay and concealing odors, but also turned the corpse's face into a glossy, hardened mask. Evisceration and perfuming. To prevent internal rot, embalmers removed the organs through an incision along the left flank, an act performed with bronze knives. The organs were treated separately in jars of myrrh and frankincense, the same resins used in temple incense, and then either reinterred or buried in urns. Despite these precautions, the process was imperfect. Corpses stored for extended periods in family mausoleums frequently oozed dark liquefaction, an unholy stew of blood, fat, and microbial sludge that seeped through stone floors. The epic of the wake. In the days before burial, mourners gathered for the prothesis, the public viewing of the body. The corpse lay sprawled on a bier, faces of wax attendants flanking either side to represent virtues like piety and courage. Yet no amount of covering could mask the slick sheen of decomposition. The stench of embalming fluids mingled with the ammonia from fluids still evaporating from soft tissues, and guests fanned their faces with linen scrolls. Even the most devoted relatives whispered about how her skin gleamed unnaturally, a euphemism for glossy resin that preserved the body at the cost of any human warmth. Lessons from the lustral smoke. In the end, every imperial woman succumbed to the same indignities of mortality. No amount of lead paste, incense, or pitch could overcome biology. Their lives, glittering from a distance, were riddled with filth, disease, and the constant specter of infection. Yet in these dismal truths lies a haunting insight. The power of status could shape the rituals of cleanliness, but it could not rewrite the realities of the human body. The Empress's life was crafted to project divine perfection, yet it was, and remains, a testament to the universal struggle against rot, plague, and decay. Closing tease for Part 4. Join us in Part 4, where we unravel the final threads of imperial grandeur, the posthumous cults that revered these royal women, the ghastly relics that outlived their owners, and the echoes of their hygiene horrors in our own modern beauty obsessions. Because nothing says history like the lingering stench of power, and sometimes the more things change, the more they stay revolting. The cult of the Empress, worship amid stench. Long after the Empress's body had been sealed in its marble sarcophagus, her legend endured in the rituals of the imperial cult. Temples were erected in her honor, statues draped in veils, incense burned daily, but the smells of worship were as far from divine as her mortal hygiene had been. Incense and excrement, devotees flocked to her temple at dawn, scattering frankincense, myrrh, and dried laurel leaves across braziers. Yet beneath the marble floor lay subterranean chambers once used for storing sacrificial remains, and worse, for latrine overflow diverted from palace sewers. As heat rose through the vents, humid air carried miasmas of aged fecal matter into the sanctuary, mingling grotesquely with sweet smoke. Priests claimed the foul fumes were the earthly sacrifice that accompanied the Empress's divine essence, blood of the vein. On her birthday festival, worshippers reenacted her famed bathing ceremonies by pouring bowls of water over her statue's feet, an act symbolizing purity. Some sects heat the water with powdered gypsum to mimic the emulsified oils she favored. This sacred water was then ladled into cups and sprinkled over the heads of the faithful. Inevitably, residual clay and oil particles turned the mixture murky, and many devotees left the temple with streaked robes and hair crusted in sediment, convinced they had been anointed by her very spirit. Relics of rot, from ashes to artifacts, empresses left behind treasures meant to immortalize their power. Lockets of hair, ivory combs, personal pomanders. But time and decay transformed these objects into testaments of biological horror. Hair relics, locks of her dark curls, once gift-wrapped in embroidered silk, aged into brittle, wiry wisps. Historians found these hair relics still harboring lice eggs and microscopic fungal spores that leapt back to life when humidity rose, evidence that even after death, the Empress's body remained a breeding ground for parasites. Pomander pots, tiny metal boxes encrusted with jewels, meant to house fragrant powders, were excavated by later archaeologists. Inside, the organic ingredients had molded into a gray-black paste so corrosive it ate through the silver casing. Chemical analysis centuries later revealed traces of ambergris mixed with sulfur compounds, a combination that, when heated by sunlight, released hydrogen sulfide, the same gas that smells of rotten eggs. Perfume bottles and tubes, flasks of leaded glass sealed with wax, were cracked open in modern laboratories. A pungent cloud of mercaptans and aldehydes burst forth, the toxic remnants of ancient rose and jasmine oils decomposed over millennia. Researchers handling the vapors had to don masks, recognizing the same acrid bite that must have assaulted the Empress's nostrils each morning. The Imperial Mausoleum, a chamber of infection. Her final resting place within the family mausoleum was designed to honor her as a goddess. But beneath the marble lions and carved reliefs lay a catacomb of decay, sealed sarcophagi. Each sarcophagus was sealed with plaster mixed with animal glue and crushed seashells. In theory, this kept out rodents and scavengers. In practice, it trapped gases inside. Funeral inscriptions boasted of her everlasting stench, a phrase that later turned out to be all too literal as visitors reported faint sulfuric whiffs upon entering. Mold mosaics. The mausoleum's walls were tiled with colorful mosaics depicting her greatest triumphs, victories at ceremonies, public audiences, and sacred rituals. In the damp, poorly ventilated chambers, these tiles became canvases for fungal art. Green, black, and white mold seeped into the grout, creating grotesque halos around her likeness. Pilgrims offered coins at her tomb, only to retrieve them corroded by secret acids emitted from the spores. Cryptic crypts. Beyond her own epitaph lay a series of narrow passages leading to the ossuary where lesser nobles were interred. Visitors walking these corridors felt the air grow chill and dank. Many later recorded coughing fits and skin irritations attributed to the Empress's breath still lingering between the bones. Lessons for modern beauty obsessions. Fast forward to today. We line up for chemical peels, inject botulinum toxin to freeze our faces, and swipe on lotions packed with parabens and phthalates. The more things change, the more they echo the extremes of imperial hygiene. Lead in lipstick. Remarkably, lead traces were found in early 20th century makeup, an eerie parallel to the Empress's white lead face paste. Studies today show chronic lead exposure still occurs through cosmetics, prompting regulators to limit its presence in products. Yet every generation rediscovers the same mistakes in pursuit of an ideal complexion. Perfume plasticizers. Modern fragrances rely on synthetic musk compounds, many of which act as endocrine disruptors. Just as Roman women unknowingly poisoned themselves with heavy metals in their face paste and perfumes, today's consumers risk hormonal imbalances from chemicals that linger on skin and contaminate waterways. Shared razors and acne toggles. In gym showers and hostel bathrooms, people still share razors, loofahs, and hairbrushes, modern analogs of the Empress's shared strigils. This casual equipment sharing facilitates the spread of fungal infections, lice outbreaks, and scabies, reminding us that communal hygiene always carries hidden risks. Reclaiming hygiene, what we can learn. While we may never slip back into communal latrines or slather lead on our cheeks, the Roman example teaches timeless lessons. Skepticism of tradition. Practices become entrenched by status, not science. The Empress's beauty rituals were upheld not because they worked, but because they signaled power. Similarly, today's trends, from detox teas to extreme face masks, deserve scrutiny beyond their marketing promises. Importance of sanitation. The flow of clean water transformed public health. Where Rome once bathed in reused aqueduct streams, modern plumbing and wastewater treatment underpin our standards. We owe our lower infection rates and longer lifespans to innovations that tackle what the Romans could not. Microscopic germs, balance of luxury and health. Beauty need not compromise safety. Formulations today are rigorously tested for toxicity, and ingredients are regulated. Yet demand for exotic ingredients, like shark cartilage or ivory, risks environmental damage and cruelty. Echoes of the Empress's downy feather mattress grown from slaughter. Final reflections, the eternal battle against rot. The Empress's life, death, and posthumous cult remind us that power and status cannot conquer biology. From the moment of her birth, surrounded by unsterilized linens, to her embalming and beyond, she navigated a world where every human triumph bore the seed of decay. Her legacy is not solely in the marble statues or minted coins, but in the cautionary tales she leaves. When we pursue beauty, comfort, or status without humility, we court the very horrors we wish to escape. The Roman royal women's revolting hygiene teaches us that innovation, critical thinking, and ethical restraint are the true hallmarks of civilization. So the next time you lather on that expensive lotion or slip into your thread count sheets, pause for a moment. Think of the Empress, doused in urine and lead paste, reclining amid lice and mold. Remember that luxury, divorced from wisdom, can become its own form of degradation, and that in the quiet hum of your modern comforts, you carry echoes of imperial rot that resonate across 2 millennia. Hey guys, picture this. You've just crossed the dusty sands of Egypt under a blazing sun, your skin caked in sweat and grime, and there's no bar of scented soap in sight, just the shimmering Nile and the palace courtyard where Cleopatra herself awaits. How did the most glamorous woman in antiquity stay spotless without modern lather? Today, we're uncovering the secret rituals of the last pharaoh, diving deep into the world of milk, oils, clays, and scrapers, because when you're ruling an empire, you can't exactly pop into a pharmacy for a Dove bar. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. At the heart of ancient Egypt, soap as we know it didn't exist. Instead, Cleopatra the Seventh Philopator, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom, crafted her own luxurious ritualized substitutes. Far from the plain bars of oleic scented glycerin we slather on today, her cleansing arsenal was an alchemical fusion of nature's richest offerings: silky animal fats, tart milk, alkaline salts, fragrant flowers, and the fine dust of desert sands. Each element played a precise role, whether softening skin, sealing in moisture, or lifting away the day's burdens, without foam, suds, or bubbles. Let's begin with the queen's most legendary indulgence, her famed milk bath. According to Roman chroniclers, Cleopatra bathed in the lactic elixir of hundreds of milk-laden donkeys, believing their rich casein proteins and mild acidity would leave her complexion as smooth as polished alabaster. While some historians scoff at the literal truth, questioning whether hundreds or even dozens of donkeys were practical, there's no doubt that lactate-rich baths were part of her beauty lore. In water warmed by the desert sun, the gentle lactic acid would dissolve dead skin cells, while the fats in whole milk coated the skin, locking in hydration. Roman writers whispered that courtiers would dip their own sleeves in her bathwater, hoping to capture a trace of royal radiance. But milk alone wouldn't cut through the dense layers of Nile dust and sweat. Cleopatra's attendants, often young eunuchs trained in the arts of beauty, prepared a honey and oat paste as a second, more abrasive step. Honey, prized across the Mediterranean as a natural antiseptic, applied directly to the body, acted as a mild adhesive, pulling out lingering impurities. Ground barley or oats mixed into the sticky medium provided gentle, grainy friction. As the paste was massaged over every inch of her royal frame, it loosened stubborn dirt, while the honey soothed micro wounds and protected against infection. The result? A subtle sheen of honey residue that sealed moisture into the pores, leaving the queen's skin supple and sweetly scented before the final rinse. Following the honey scrub, no modern shower head awaited, only copper pitchers pouring water drawn from the Nile's coolest depths. The attendants alternated between splashes of pure river water and infusions steeped with rose petals, jasmine buds, or dried lavender. These floral waters served not just to rinse away the sticky paste, but to impart an ephemeral perfume that trailed after Cleopatra as she moved through her courtyards and corridors. In a land where ambient odors could range from the fragrant incense of temple offerings to the grime of bustling markets, the subtle waft of rosewater signaled nobility and self-care. Next came the oil cleanse, anointing the skin with rich sesame or olive oil, then scraping it off with a curved bronze strigil. If you've ever tried deep cleansing with oil, applying olive oil to the face and wiping it off with a warm cloth, you've experienced a tiny echo of this ancient ritual. For Cleopatra, the step was elevated to regal theater. Attendants stood on either side, each wielding a polished strigil shaped like a crescent moon. They swept the oil across her limbs and torso, drawing out lingering grime and dead skin. As the metal blade glided over her body, it collected clumps of oil and dirt, which were ceremoniously discarded into alabaster bowls. This method left the skin clean without stripping away natural moisture, vital in Egypt's sun-parched climate. But what truly set it apart from our DIY oil cleanses was the use of aromatics mixed into the oil itself. Cleopatra infused her anointing oils with myrrh and frankincense, resins sacred to Egyptian gods, and sometimes with nard, an exotic root perfume imported from the Himalayas. These additions didn't just mask odors, they delivered antiseptic properties and a complex fragrance profile that lingered for hours. While the strigil removed surface oils, the essential compounds remained embedded in the skin's upper layers, creating a slow-release scent that whispered of temple rituals and exotic travels. After oil and scraping came the application of natron, a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, chloride, and sulfate. This Egyptian crystalline powder, harvested from the edges of desert lakes, served as a primitive soap substitute. Cleopatra's alchemists would blend natron with volcanic ash and fine desert sand to create a gritty, mildly alkaline paste. This scrub, applied to particularly rough areas, elbows, knees, feet, exfoliated deeply, sloughing away calluses and stubborn patches. Its alkaline nature also helped to soften oils for easier removal, prepping the skin for another round of gentle rinsing. But because natron could be harsh in high concentrations, her beauticians knew just the right ratios, enough to cleanse, but not so much as to irritate her royal skin. For her face, a far more delicate canvas, Cleopatra favored a mask of Nile clay and crushed green amethyst. This mask, mixed fresh each morning, tightened pores and pulled out impurities. The clay's fine particles absorbed excess oils, while trace minerals like iron and magnesium replenished the skin's natural mineral balance. In the cool, shaded antechamber, Cleopatra would recline on silk cushions covered in white linen, attendants gently fanning incense smoke around her as the mask dried. When it cracked and stiffened, they rinsed it away with warm rose water, revealing a complexion that poets described as dew-kissed and diplomats envied as more luminous than moonlight on the river. But let's not forget the crown jewel of her, routine, the perfumed bath chamber itself. Far from a simple tiled room, it was a dedicated sanctum with mosaic floors depicting water lilies, alabaster basins carved with hieroglyphs, and hidden vents through which heated air circulated. At strategic intervals, alabaster jars were opened, releasing whispered wafts of agar wood, lotus blossom, and even smoldering blue lotus flowers, numbing in small doses and legendary for their mild euphoria. Cleopatra's guests sometimes claimed they felt drowsy merely inhaling the chamber's atmosphere, a prelude to the queen's own afternoon siestas. As she emerged from these baths, her skin dewy, smelling faintly of honey and myrrh, Cleopatra faced the final step, gentle drying with unbleached linen cloths. These cloths had been rinsed in fragrant water and hung to air dry on papyrus-lined racks. The linen, reputed for its low moisture retention, whisked away surface water, while the infused botanicals continued to scent her skin. Once dried, she slipped into a thin, gauzy shift of fine Egyptian cotton or silk, imported from her ally in the Far East, allowing any residual moisture to evaporate naturally in the palace breeze. Throughout this elaborate process, every element served multiple purposes: practical cleansing, skin nourishment, olfactory signaling, and social theater. In a world without synthetic detergents, deodorizers, or disposable wipes, Cleopatra wielded the raw materials of her empire, milk, honey, oils, natron, clays, as both hygiene tools and symbols of her power. Each ritual underscored her mastery over nature, her command of luxury, and her role as the living embodiment of Isis, goddess of life and renewal. By the end of this first segment, we've traced the queen's daily voyage from dusty caravan survivor to the freshly anointed sovereign of the Nile. But stay tuned, because in part 2 we'll unveil the clandestine nighttime regimens she performed under torchlight, the secret formulas she shared only with her most trusted confidants, and the surprising way she repurposed common kitchen staples into potent cleansing agents. Get ready to discover how Cleopatra turned even the humblest pantry items into royal beauty must-haves, and how those same ingredients ended up in some of the sketchiest spa hacks you won't believe existed. And as dusk falls over Alexandria's glittering harbor, Cleopatra's day of grandeur is far from over. It's when her most clandestine cleansing rituals come alive under flickering torchlight. While the most wash by daylight, the queen prized her twilight regimen for its heightened intimacy and secrecy, reserved only for her most trusted confidants. First came the secret moonlit mask, concocted in the alabaster bowls of her inner sanctum. Deep in the palace, lamps carved from onyx were lit, casting soft halos of light. Attendants, their hands gloved in fine linen to prevent any foreign oils from mixing in, spooned out a thick paste of ground pistachio shells, pounded to the consistency of coarse sugar. To this they stirred in a few drops of castor oil and the juice of bitter pomegranates, the tart acidity helping to dislodge pore-clogging residues. Cleopatra reclined on a low marble divan, her limbs draped in gauzy scarves, as maidens applied the gritty mask in sweeping strokes. The abrasion felt like a gentle sharpening of the skin, and as the mask stiffened, tiny fissures formed, trapping dirt in its web. When it was scraped off by a slender spatula of polished horn, the queen's complexion glowed with an otherworldly luminescence. But that was only the beginning. Next came her legendary kitchen alchemy cleanse, and an ingenious repurposing of humble pantry staples. In the heart of the royal kitchen, staff boiled carob pods and fenugreek seeds in a cauldron of Nile water until the concoction thickened into a sticky syrup. This syrup, once cooled, became a versatile cleanser. For her body, attendants warmed it slightly, then massaged it into her skin like a body wash. The carob's natural sugars created a mild foaming action, while fenugreek's mucilaginous properties soothed any abrasions from the earlier mask. When rinsed off with cool rose water, the queen felt refreshed, as though the day's weight had been lifted from her shoulders. On her face, The same syrup was transformed into a delicate nectar strip mask. Thin strips of softened papyrus were dipped into the potion, then carefully placed over her forehead, cheeks, and chin. After several minutes, these strips dried into translucent films. With a quick, practiced tug, each strip peeled away, taking with it every trace of oil, dust, and residual makeup. The process was both practical and theatrical. Courtiers stationed just outside the chambers said they could hear the soft snap of each strip leaving her skin, a signal that perfection was being restored in secrecy. While the kitchen alchemy worked wonders, it also doubled as a fragrance workshop. The leftover syrup, infused with delicate spice notes of carob and bitter sweetness of pomegranate, was cooled and bottled. Cleopatra's personal flask, carved from black basalt and sealed with beeswax, held this evening elixir. She dabbed tiny amounts onto her wrist, behind her ears, and the hollow of her throat, a final olfactory signature before she retired for the choke night. Only then did she move to the heart of her nocturnal routine, the incense steam purge. In a small domed chamber adjacent to her bedchamber, a copper brazier was filled with hot coals. Atop them, powdered frankincense and drops of rose oil vaporized in gentle plumes. The queen positioned her head beneath a carved limestone hood, from which narrow vents funneled the scented steam straight to her face. Wrapped in a linen hood to trap the vapors, she inhaled deeply for several minutes. This ritual was believed to both clear her lungs and purify her skin. Ancient doctors claimed the steam opened pores, allowing residual toxins to escape. Attendants stood by with linen cloths to absorb the condensation, preventing the water from dripping onto her robes. Meanwhile, away from the steam, Cleopatra's hair underwent its own secret rite. While day treatments used ash and oils, nighttime demanded something lighter yet potent. The queen's personal perfumer blended a hair rinse of ground saffron threads, camphor, and crushed bay laurel leaves steeped overnight in cool spring water. At midnight's peak, Cleopatra's hairdresser anointed her scalp with the infusion, massaging in slow, circular motions. The camphor provided a cooling, invigorating sensation, while saffron's antioxidants nourished the roots. No modern scalp tonic could match this fusion of sensory delight and therapeutic care. Once applied, the mixture was left to sit for an hour under a silk wrap, allowing the essential compounds to penetrate deep into each follicle. When finally rinsed away, her hair shone with a golden sheen, and the room smelled faintly of spice markets. As the night deepened, it was time for the final purification, the silvered water rite. In an ornate basin of cool Nile water, Cleopatra's alchemist in residence had suspended a rod of pure silver. The metal ionized minute particles into the water, imparting potent antimicrobial properties. An attendant dipped a clean cotton wisp into the silvered water and gently cleansed around the queen's eyes, nostrils, and lips, areas most vulnerable to bacteria. It was a delicate procedure, performed in near silence, the only sounds the faint drip of water and the rustle of linen. This intimate act spoke volumes of the trust between the empress and her inner circle. Any slip could cause injury, yet the queen allowed it nightly to guard against infection. Finally, Cleopatra prepared for rest on her sumptuous divan, primed to receive her restful elixir. She consumed a small sip of an herbal tisane composed of dried rosemary, marjoram, and a pinch of poppy seeds. The brew's light soporific effect gently coaxed her towards sleep without leaving her mind foggy. Instead of a pillow, her head rested on a flattened bladder of cooled rosewater, a practical application of the rose-cooled headrest that prevented heat buildup and relieved tension. As she drifted into slumber, her attendants performed a silent veil of protection ceremony. They hung small sachets of mugwort and hyssop around her sleeping chamber, believed to ward off nightmares and evil spirits. The soft hum of a fan, powered by a concealed water wheel, circulated the scented air, ensuring the queen's last breaths were filled with the fragrance of herbs and flowers rather than the mustiness of closed rooms. These nighttime rituals were more than hygiene. They were rites of renewal, blending practicality, alchemy, and devotion into a seamless tapestry of self-care. In a world without modern sanitation or synthetic cosmetics, Cleopatra's nightly regimen kept her skin, scalp, and spirit unfailingly radiant. In Part 3, we'll journey into the political dimension of Cleopatra's beauty routines, how she used her signature scents and secret cleansers as instruments of diplomacy, the scandalous gifts she sent via carefully preserved balms to seduce and yet sway foreign rulers, and the hidden messages encoded in her ointment jars that whispered of alliances and betrayals. You'll discover how a single vial of her famous Nile rose oil could change the course of history, and why modern perfumers still scramble to replicate her lost formulas. Stay tuned for a revelation of fragrance, intrigue, and the intoxicating power of Cleopatra's personal care. Tonight we uncover the story of how Cleopatra didn't just wash. She conquered with scent, with oils, with skin so soft it could start wars, and arguably did. This isn't just hygiene. This is espionage, seduction, and diplomacy bottled in alabaster. And no, she didn't do it with soap, because when you're Cleopatra, you don't wash your hands of problems, you perfume them into submission. While most rulers forged alliances with ink and blood, Cleopatra wielded ointment jars like diplomatic letters, each filled with a message, each sealed not just to preserve the contents but to encode her intentions. Her palace had a wing devoted to perfumery, a hybrid of alchemical lab and boudoir, where fragrances were brewed not for vanity but strategy. Enter the Kaifi chamber, named after the famed Egyptian incense. But Kaifi wasn't just religious, it was political. Cleopatra's court alchemists perfected this blend of honey, wine, myrrh, and over a dozen herbs into something far more potent, a fragrance weaponized for persuasion. When emissaries arrived from Rome or the East, they were greeted with the waft of Kaifi, not just as a sign of wealth, but as a sensory declaration of power. The air itself whispered, "You're not in Rome anymore." And here's where it gets fascinating. Cleopatra didn't merely wear perfume, she engineered experiences. Her legendary meeting with Mark Antony. She didn't just float down the Nile on a barge, she perfumed the sails. Historical sources tell us that as her ship approached, the breeze carried waves of scent far ahead, so Antony smelled her before he ever saw her. Imagine it, an olfactory ambush. By the time she appeared, reclining in gold cloth as incense curled around her, the seduction had already begun. Not with words, with aroma. This was Cleopatra's genius. She understood scent as memory. In a time before photographs or films, what lingered wasn't the image of a queen, it was her fragrance. Guests reported smelling her on their garments weeks after leaving court. That wasn't accidental. Her perfumers infused her oils with fixatives, substances like labdanum and benzoin that made the scent cling, haunt, and echo. You didn't just meet Cleopatra, you carried her with you, whether you liked it or not. And what about her soap alternative? This is where it gets truly devious. One of Cleopatra's favorite cleansing agents was a fragrant oil paste made of crushed almonds, sesame oil, and hints of cinnamon bark. After applying it to the skin, she would sit in a warm room as the paste absorbed dirt and sweat. Then, using a blunt blade called a strigil, the oil and impurities were scraped away, leaving her skin not just clean, but perfumed. Soap removes scent. Cleopatra added it. Even her sweat smelled luxurious. But here's the twist. She didn't keep these secrets to herself. Cleopatra's court sent scented gifts to allies and enemies alike. Tiny jars of balm, sealed with wax and stamped with her sigil. These weren't just gifts, they were soft power. To accept the balm was to accept her. To use it was to carry her mark. Some jars contained exotic oils from India or Arabia, difficult to acquire, signaling the vast reach of her trade networks. Others were one-of-a-kind blends that could not be duplicated, meaning that when a Roman senator's wife wore Cleopatra's balm, everyone knew. Even more intriguingly, recent archaeological analysis of ancient ointment jars suggests that some of these gifts might have been laced with subtle stimulants, natural aphrodisiacs derived from blue lotus or mandrake, harmless enough to avoid suspicion, but potent enough to enhance the experience of those who use them. A scented balm, yes, but also a chemical seduction. Cleopatra's use of fragrance even extended to her correspondence. Letters to foreign dignitaries were sprinkled with powdered musk and sealed in aromatic wax. By the time the scroll was opened, the scent was so pervasive it seemed as though the queen herself were present. Ancient biographers claimed that Mark Antony once held a perfumed letter to his face for hours. claiming he could hear Cleopatra's voice in the fragrance. Was it love, lust, or the calculated use of a sensory signature? Let's not forget the power of bathing. While Roman baths were communal, Cleopatra's were ceremonial. Her bathwater wasn't just milk, it was scented milk, specifically donkey's milk infused with rose oil, crushed vanilla pods, and saffron strands. This luxurious soak not only softened her skin, it infused her pores with fragrance. After bathing, she didn't need perfume, she was perfume. Her skin became the source, emitting aroma with every gesture, every whisper, every breath. And this mattered. In negotiations, Cleopatra's presence was as much about olfactory dominance as political savvy. Roman elites were known to comment on the queen's presence before she spoke, noting the sweet and strange aroma that filled the room. In a male-dominated world, Cleopatra rewrote the rules, not with swords or scrolls, but with scent. A woman's presence, once meant to be discreet, became undeniable. One of the most famous examples, the scented scroll scandal. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra once sent Octavian's sister a diplomatic letter, but instead of ordinary parchment, the scroll was soaked in perfume and stored in a silver case. When opened, the scent spilled out, delicate yet overwhelming. Roman gossip columns, yes, they had those, claimed it was a subtle insult, a way of saying, "You may have power, but I have grace." A war of aromas won before the first sword was drawn. In Cleopatra's Egypt, scent wasn't a luxury, it was a language. Each oil, each balm, each incense stick spoke of status, ambition, and desire. Her soap alternatives weren't just cleaning agents, they were tools of influence, smoothed over skin, seeping into politics. In Part 4, we'll explore the afterlife of Cleopatra's beauty lore, how her recipes were smuggled out of Egypt, how medieval alchemists obsessed over recreating her formulas, and how modern perfumers are still chasing the myth of Cleopatra's scent. We'll dive into the tombs of forgotten queens, uncovering lost balms, and follow the trail of her legacy and fragrance, one that refuses to fade. We reach the final fragrant chapter of our journey through the scented world of Cleopatra, the woman who didn't just rule Egypt, but perfumed history itself. We've seen how she washed without soap, bathed in scented milk, and seduced Rome with oils instead of armies, but her influence didn't die with her. In fact, Cleopatra's beauty rituals, her aromatic strategies, her legendary cleanliness lived on, echoing through centuries like a whiff of incense in an empty throne room. When Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, whether by asp, dagger, or poisoned comb, the world didn't just lose a queen, it lost a walking fragrance empire. But here's the secret, her scent didn't vanish. Her perfume recipes, her bathing rituals, her cleansing oils, they leaked out of Egypt like sacred smoke. Roman invaders were notorious looters, and Cleopatra's palaces were pillaged with surgical precision. Among the treasures stolen were not just gold or manuscripts, but her ointment jars. Roman aristocrats, already obsessed with Egyptian mystique, now had access to the very cosmetic arsenal of the most famous queen on earth. And this is where it gets wild. Roman noble women began replicating Cleopatra's hygiene rituals, or at least trying to. They didn't understand the science behind her cleansing oils, but they understood the status. Cleopatra's milk baths became all the rage in Rome, though donkey's milk was hard to come by. Some substituted goat's milk or even cow's milk, adding rose petals and honey to mimic the queen's allure. Roman bathhouses even offered Cleopatra soaks, promising youth, beauty, and maybe a whiff of scandal. But it wasn't just milk. Her fragrant oils became the stuff of legend. Roman perfumers tried to reverse engineer her famous body balm, an oil blend said to include cinnamon, almond, myrrh, and crushed rose. But here's the kicker, they failed. Why? Because Cleopatra's perfumers had access to plants and resins not found in the Roman world, exotics from Africa, India, and Arabia, transported along trade routes that vanished after her death. Cleopatra didn't just rule Egypt, she ruled a supply chain, and once that collapsed, so did the secret to her scent. Still, rumors persisted. In medieval Europe, apothecaries spoke of a lost manuscript, the Cleopatra Codex, allegedly smuggled out of Alexandria by a fleeing servant. This text supposedly contained her exact beauty recipes, including her oil cleanser, her signature incense blend, and the infamous night oil, a balm used before sleep to preserve skin and seduce dreams. Of course, the codex has never been found, but that didn't stop alchemists and perfumers from trying. In 14th century Venice, a guild known as the Fratelli del Profumo claimed to possess a fragment of the codex, a list of ingredients for Cleopatra's cleansing balm. It included such oddities as powdered ostrich shell, blue lotus resin, and lion's fat. Most likely a fake, but people bought it. They paid fortunes for vials labeled oil of the Nile, believing they were using the same unguent Cleopatra used to seduce Caesar. Even in the Islamic Golden Age, scholars like Avicenna studied Egyptian perfumery. He invented steam distillation, a technique that likely had roots in Cleopatra's own palace laboratories. You see, Cleopatra's perfumers didn't just mix oils, they distilled them. Alabaster jars found in her tomb complex show traces of condensed essential oils, evidence that she may have pioneered what we now call aromatherapy. Fast forward to the Renaissance. Artists and nobles revived Cleopatra's legend. Paintings of her always included fragrant symbolism: incense burners, oil vials, perfumed petals, and hygiene manuals from the 16th century quoted Cleopatra as a source of beauty wisdom, often completely made up, but no less believed. One guide claimed she washed her face with vinegar and gold dust. Another insisted she slept on pillows stuffed with myrrh. Truth? Fantasy? Doesn't matter. Cleopatra had become the eternal queen of scent. Now let's talk about modern perfumery. In the 19th century, archaeologists began unearthing Cleopatra's Alexandria. Among the ruins, they found fragrance factories, large buildings with oil presses, drying racks for herbs, and sealed amphorae filled with ancient balm. Analysis revealed a rich, spicy perfume base with hints of myrrh, cinnamon, and pine. One amphora, labeled with hieroglyphs for a sacred oil of Isis, was so well preserved that modern scientists managed to recreate the scent. When the perfume was unveiled in 2019, people lined up to smell what Cleopatra might have worn. Reviews? Earthy, intense, almost intoxicating. A scent that didn't just whisper luxury, it declared dominance. This wasn't floral sweetness, this was power in a bottle. Today, high-end fragrance houses still chase Cleopatra's ghost. Brands release perfumes inspired by Cleopatra, promising to capture her allure. But here's the truth. Her real secret wasn't in the scent. It was in how she used it. Strategically, socially, sensually. Cleopatra didn't wear perfume to smell nice. She wore it to command the room. And her soap? Let's remember, it was never soap. It was oil. Oil that cleansed, scented, and seduced all at once. While others scrubbed, Cleopatra anointed. While others washed away dirt, she infused herself with power. So the next time you reach for a bar of soap or spray a bit of perfume, remember this. You're not just cleaning or freshening up. You're continuing a legacy started by a queen who made hygiene into history's most elegant weapon. Sleep well tonight, but don't forget to anoint wisely, because Cleopatra's true cleanliness wasn't about being spotless, it was about being unforgettable. Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into something that will have you questioning everything you know about ancient beauty, royalty, and the idea of a perfect smile. Because while modern dental care has us flossing, brushing, rinsing, and whitening, like it's an Olympic sport, ancient queens, they had other priorities, which is exactly why most ancient queens rarely brushed their teeth, and their reasons were weirder, grosser, and frankly more surprising than you might expect. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Let's set the stage. Imagine an ancient queen, say in Egypt, Babylon, or Rome. She's draped in silk, adorned in gold, surrounded by incense, perfumes, and rare cosmetics. She has a retinue of servants, astrologers, and advisors at her beck and call. But what she doesn't have? A toothbrush. Not even close. Now, you might think, maybe they had their own version of brushing. Some twig, some chew stick, some ancient minty potion. And you'd be partly right. But here's the kicker. While some basic oral care tools existed, most queens didn't use them daily, or even regularly. Why? because in the ancient world, clean teeth weren't the priority. The focus was breath and status, not sparkling molars. Let's talk ancient Egypt first. Cleopatra, that icon of beauty and seduction, likely didn't own a toothbrush. Ancient Egyptian oral hygiene did exist. In fact, they had early toothpastes made of ground ox hooves, ashes, myrrh, and eggshell. Sounds tasty, right? But this gritty paste was mostly used by the priestly elite or those with serious dental issues. Queens like Cleopatra had access to these mixtures, but they were seen as medicinal, not routine. What mattered more was breath control. The Egyptians believed bad breath could ward off the gods or offend spirits, so they chewed myrrh, resin, or cinnamon bark for freshness. Cleopatra was more likely to chew a fragrant resin than scrub her teeth with abrasive bone powder. Why? Because smelling nice was spiritual, social, and seductive. Pearly whites? That wasn't even on the radar. Fast forward to Mesopotamia. Babylonian queens? Same deal. There's evidence of toothpicks and chew sticks, but again, oral hygiene was for function, not aesthetics. Clean teeth didn't signal status. Soft hands, scented hair, flawless skin, those were the markers of royalty. And when it came to the mouth, they used breath-freshening herbs, rinses of wine or vinegar, and in some cases, pastes of crushed shells and honey. Think more mouth perfume than dental care. Now, brace yourself, because ancient Rome takes it to a whole new level. Roman queens and noble women had access to dental tools, sure. The Romans were inventive. They used tooth powders, chewing sticks, and even early mouthwashes. But what was in those mouthwashes? Brace for it. Urine. Specifically, Portuguese urine, believed to have superior whitening powers due to its high ammonia content. Yes, elite Roman women used urine rinses for their teeth, but not regularly, because it was seen as extreme, and many avoided it unless their teeth were visibly stained. For queens and high-born ladies, dental care was reactive, not proactive. Your breath smelled bad? Chew fennel. Your gums bled? Rinse with vinegar. Your teeth fell out? Well, get a gold replacement or cover your mouth with a fan. A mystery solved. And here's a key point. Dental tools were considered medical instruments, not beauty accessories. They were used by physicians, not personal attendants, so queens didn't have a daily brushing ritual. Instead, they had breath rituals. They chewed fragrant woods, rinsed with rose water, or held cloves under the tongue. Why? Because in ancient courts, the scent of your breath was more important than the state of your enamel. A queen's mouth needed to smell like divinity, not Colgate. And here's the thing, dental decay was rampant. Even with all their oils, perfumes, and luxury, queens suffered toothaches, abscesses, and gum disease. But it wasn't shameful. Having missing teeth was normal. What mattered was how you masked it. In fact, some ancient queens used mouth coverings as part of fashion. Thin veils, fans, or even decorated hand gestures to conceal the mouth were part of the ritual. Not just modesty, but strategic breath control. In part 2, we'll dive into specific remedies, tooth cleaning rituals, and the ancient dentists who served the queens in secret. And trust me, it gets weirder, messier, and somehow even more glamorous. We're diving even deeper into the surprisingly unhygienic world of ancient queens and their relationship with dental care. In part 1, we uncovered how royalty like Cleopatra and Roman noblewomen rarely, if ever, brushed their teeth. Instead, they relied on breath-freshening rituals and sometimes horrifying concoctions to maintain their regal aura. But tonight, we're turning the spotlight onto the remedies, the rituals, and the royal dentists of the ancient world. Because if you thought urine mouthwash was bad, brace yourself. Let's start with ancient dental remedies. What did queens do when their teeth hurt, bled, or started falling out? Step 1. Panic quietly. Step 2. Call the court healer. Step 3. Prepare to suffer. Ancient Egyptian medical texts, like the Ebers Papyrus from around 1500 BCE, contained over a dozen treatments for toothaches, gum disease, and loose teeth. The recipes, equal parts mystical and disgusting. One treatment involved a paste of cumin, incense, onion, and crushed barley, mixed with donkey fat, then inserted into the mouth. Another called for mouse bones ground into a powder and rubbed onto sore gums. Queens, of course, got the deluxe version, honey and myrrh mixtures with a dash of gold leaf. Did it help? Probably not, but it looked expensive, And that's half the battle. In Rome, if a queen suffered a toothache, she might receive smoke treatments. Heated herbs and resins, often frankincense or wormwood, were burned and the smoke funneled into the mouth using a hollow reed. The goal? Numb the pain. The reality? A mouthful of hot smoke and a lingering taste of despair. Let's talk about early dental tools. Ancient dental surgeons used metal scrapers, tweezers, and even small drills. These weren't gentle tools. They were more like medieval torture devices, and queens avoided them unless things were truly dire. Imagine lying back in a gilded palace chamber while someone with no anesthesia drills into your tooth using a bow drill. That's not royal, that's a horror movie, but some queens did go under the drill. In ancient India, texts like the Karaka Samhita mention tooth cleaning sticks, dantakashta, and Ayurvedic rinses. Royal women used neem twigs chewed until they frayed into bristles. These were rubbed against the teeth, but again, not daily. This was more of a special occasion ritual than a daily habit. And remember, the goal wasn't clean teeth. The goal was fresh breath and spiritual harmony. In India, bad breath was linked to imbalanced doshas, so queens chewed cardamom, cloves, and betel leaves. But here's the twist. Betel nut stains teeth deep red, so queens often walked around with blood-red teeth and blackened gums, which were considered sensual and powerful. Yes, in some cultures, stained teeth were beautiful. Ancient Japanese noblewomen practiced ohaguro, the art of blackening teeth. It was seen as elegant, mysterious, and a sign of status. Queens drank iron-rich teas or applied lacquer mixed with vinegar and iron filings to darken their teeth. The result? Teeth that looked like polished obsidian. This wasn't about hiding bad hygiene. It was fashion, a declaration of wealth and class. Clean white teeth? That was for peasants. Black teeth? That was the look of royalty. And let's not forget the magical protections. Many queens wore amulets against toothaches. In Egypt, charms inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead were worn around the neck to ward off mouth demons. In Greece, it was believed that tooth pain came from toothworms. Yes, actual worms that lived in your teeth. So when a queen complained of pain, the healer might chant spells to drive out the worm, sometimes placing warm olive oil in the mouth to drown it. If this failed, they might resort to plucking the tooth, without anesthetic, of course. Queens endured it with grace, or at least that's how history remembers it. But behind palace doors, you can bet there was screaming, bribery, and maybe a fainting servant or two. In part 3, we'll explore the bizarre beauty standards that shaped royal oral care, the foods queens ate that destroyed their teeth, and the lengths they went to hide the damage. Guys, welcome back to this royal dental saga. In part 3, we're diving into the bizarre beauty standards, the tooth-destroying royal diets, and the extreme lengths queens went to hide the damage, because nothing screams elegance like gilded tooth rot. Let's start with ancient beauty standards, because in many royal courts, dental health wasn't just ignored, it was actively sacrificed for beauty, power, and prestige. Clean, white teeth, not the goal. In some cultures, the ideal was decorated teeth, or even filed, sharpened, or stained teeth. In Mesoamerican cultures, royal women, especially among the Maya and Aztecs, underwent tooth inlay procedures. Tiny jade, turquoise, or gold studs were embedded into their front teeth using a form of early dental adhesive. Yes, they had grills, over 1,000 years before hip-hop made them cool. Was this safe? Not remotely. Did it scream wealth and divine favor? Absolutely. Some queens even filed their teeth into points. This wasn't just fashion, it symbolized elite status, ritual power, and beauty. Imagine the smile of a royal Maya queen glittering with jade and sharpened like a predator. Oral health? Irrelevant. The visual impact? Legendary. In ancient China, it was common for elite women to avoid brushing their teeth and instead rinse with herbal concoctions to freshen breath. Blackened or stained teeth weren't just acceptable, they were a sign of refinement. Some noble women drank dark teas and wines that stained teeth deliberately, aligning with courtly aesthetics. And then there was the food. Oh, the tooth-destroying royal banquets. While peasants gnawed on coarse bread and onions, queens dined on candied fruits, honeyed pastries, rich meats, and wine, all day, every day. These sugar-laden feasts were devastating for teeth, but in ancient times, decay wasn't a concern. Sugar wasn't associated with cavities, it was associated with luxury. In ancient Rome, sweet wine called malsum, a mix of wine and honey, was consumed in gallons by noble women. Combine this with honey-glazed fruits, figs, and date-based desserts, and you had the perfect recipe for tooth rot. But here's the kicker. Bad teeth were still better than bad breath, at least by ancient standards. So, what did queens do when their royal smiles started falling apart? Enter the world of dental disguises. Let's talk tooth cosmetics. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe pastes and powders to whiten teeth, usually made from crushed pumice, vinegar, and yes, sometimes urine. But these weren't used daily. They were more like special occasion treatments applied before festivals, royal audiences, or marriage negotiations. When teeth fell out, and they did, queens had prosthetic options. The Etruscans, ancestors of the Romans, crafted early dental bridges made from gold wire and human or animal teeth. These could be tied into the mouth, holding place like a bizarre medieval retainer. Was it comfortable? Did it work? Sometimes. Later, Roman elites adapted this technique. Wealthy women with missing teeth might wear decorative false teeth, held in place with linen or metal bands. But again, this wasn't for chewing, it was for appearances. Sometimes queens used mouth coverings to hide bad teeth entirely. In ancient Japan, noble women sometimes covered their mouths with fans when speaking or laughing, not out of modesty, but because tooth blackening concealed nothing when decay took over. The fan became a tool of grace and disguise. In other cultures, queens simply stopped smiling in public. Portraits of royal women, especially in medieval Europe, often show closed mouths, not because they were stoic, but because smiling with rotten teeth wasn't regal. And remember, pain was constant. Royal diets caused gum disease, infections, and tooth loss, and without modern dentistry, queens relied on herbs, opium, and alcohol to dull the pain. A royal banquet might be followed by hours of moaning in a perfumed chamber, hoping the honey and clove oil paste applied to your gums worked before the next public appearance. In Part 4, we'll look at how ancient queens passed on their hygiene habits, the impact of royal decay on politics and image, and the strange legacy of dental beauty standards across centuries, because nothing says power like making bad teeth fashionable. Let's wrap up this royal dental journey with the legacy of ancient queens and their teeth, or lack thereof. Because when your smile is more myth than reality, the consequences ripple far beyond the mirror. Tonight, we uncover how rotten teeth influenced politics, why queens passed down bad habits like heirlooms, and how royal decay became a secret weapon and a public scandal. Let's start with the royal lineage of neglect. Queens often passed down their beauty rituals and dental habits to daughters, nieces, and court ladies. This wasn't just tradition, it was expectation. A queen's role was to embody divine elegance, not fuss over mundane chores like toothbrushing. In ancient Persia, noble women inherited perfumed oils and herbal pastes, not toothbrushes. Queens taught their daughters to rinse with rosewater, chew cardamom, and wear gold thread mouth veils, delicate mesh coverings that softened the look of a smile. Not because they were shy, because decay was hidden in silk and gold. By the Middle Ages, royal women across Europe followed suit. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, famed for her beauty and political power, reportedly used mint and sage rinses but never brushed her teeth. Her granddaughters, the same. The tradition wasn't about hygiene, it was about regal composure. Dirty teeth were tolerated, disheveled grace was not. Now, let's talk politics of the smile. In ancient courts, a queen's appearance could make or break alliances, marriages, even wars. But what happened when her teeth failed her? Take Empress Theodora of Byzantium, beloved by her people, feared by enemies, and notorious for her closed-lipped smiles. Rumors swirled that her teeth were rotted from wine and honey, and that she wore a thin golden plate behind her lips to keep them in place during speeches. Real or not, the myth spread, and with it came scandal, proof that even powerful queens couldn't escape the rot. In Tudor England, dental decay became a weapon. Queen Elizabeth I in her later years was known for her blackened, painful teeth. Her love of sugar had ravaged her smile. Ambassadors whispered that she couldn't speak without pain, that her face was stiff with beeswax and powder, and that she hid her mouth behind her hand. Enemies mocked her as a decaying relic, while loyalists insisted it was graceful aging. But it wasn't just vanity, teeth meant power. A queen who couldn't smile, eat, or speak properly was seen as weak, vulnerable, even cursed. Some queens avoided public appearances entirely once their teeth failed, retreating to chambers and communicating through letters or intermediaries. In some cases, dental decay was deliberately hidden from history. Portraits were retouched, descriptions sanitized, but archaeology doesn't lie. Exhumed remains of royal women across Europe, Asia, and Africa reveal severe dental issues, abscesses, missing molars, and signs of long-term pain. And here's the final twist. Royal influence shaped generations. As queens embraced tooth staining, breath freshening, and cosmetic cover-ups, the masses followed. In Japan, ohaguro spread from court to countryside. In Europe, tooth powders and pastes boomed, though brushing remained rare. In India, beetle chewing became widespread, staining millions of smiles. Queens didn't just neglect their teeth. They set trends in how teeth were viewed, treated, and ignored. Their decay became style, their pain became ritual, and their smiles, real or painted, endured. So next time you brush your teeth, think of Cleopatra rinsing with vinegar and incense, or Elizabethan uncovering her mouth with a lace glove. Because behind every royal smile was a world of secrets, suffering, and survival. Thanks for joining me on this wild, toothy ride. If you enjoyed this journey through history's most neglected smiles, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments what topic I should tackle next, and until then, brush well, floss better, and stay curious. The Elizabethan court glittered with jewels, silks, and powdered faces, but behind the elegance lurked a less glamorous truth. Bad breath was a silent epidemic, and the ladies of Queen Elizabeth I's court had to fight it like their lives and reputations depended on it, because at court everything was about perception, and one whiff of foul breath could turn whispers into scandal. Let's begin with the root of the problem: diet. The Elizabethan nobility consumed vast quantities of meat, cheese, ale, and sugar. Bread was white and refined, fruits were often avoided for fear of spoiling the humors, and vegetables were undercooked or absent. The result? Rotting food particles, plaque, and constant halitosis, and there was little understanding of bacteria or dental care, just a desperate need to stay socially acceptable. Court ladies, of course, couldn't simply stink. Their very survival depended on favor, flattery, and flirtation. To be shunned by a nobleman, or worse by the queen herself, could mean exile from court or a ruined marriage prospect, so women developed a complex arsenal of breath-masking rituals, blending folklore, herbal remedies, and pure theatricality. First, there were herbal breath sweeteners, known as sucket. These were candied herbs and flowers like cloves, fennel seeds, rose petals, and anise, coated in sugar syrup and carried in small ornate boxes called pomanders. Ladies would pop a sucket in their mouth before entering a room, or let it dissolve slowly during long audiences. Some preferred chewing spices directly, cinnamon bark, nutmeg, or cardamom pods. The intense flavors masked odors but could burn the tongue and dry the mouth. Still, a parched mouth was preferable to one that reeked of old mutton and wine. Then came mouth rinses, made at home or by court apothecaries. The recipes varied, but often included wine, vinegar, salt, and herbs. A favorite among noblewomen was a rinse of red wine infused with rosemary, mint, and sage, swished and spit into a discreet handkerchief. The alcohol killed some bacteria, the herbs masked odor, and the ritual projected refinement and care. And yes, they were mouth perfumes. Ladies would dab lavender oil or civet-infused tinctures onto their tongue, believing the scent would drift outward and overwhelm any foulness. These oils were often bitter or toxic, but that didn't matter. Court life was not about comfort, it was about enduring with grace. Let's not forget the pomander bowls. These were small metal or wooden spheres, often gilded or jeweled, filled with aromatic resins, herbs, and spices. Carried on a chain or worn around the neck, they could be raised to the nose or mouth discreetly. Some had multiple compartments, one for myrrh, another for cloves, another for ambergris. When a lady suspected her breath might betray her, she'd inhale from her pomander or even breathe into it while speaking, using it as a breath filter. There were also fans, not just for cooling, but for redirecting breath. A lady would fan herself, creating a subtle breeze that pushed her breath away from others. Fans were made of lace, feathers, and scented wood, sometimes soaked in rosewater or orange blossom essence. In tense conversations, the fan became a tool of deflection, hiding the mouth and shifting the air. And then there was the most theatrical method, the handkerchief flourish. Ladies carried embroidered handkerchiefs soaked in floral waters or spirit of vinegar, which they'd raise to their face under the guise of demure modesty. In truth, they were masking their breath, or at least trying to. Some even bit the edge of the handkerchief lightly to cover their mouth while speaking, a gesture that soon became courtly fashion. But the stakes were even higher in the presence of Queen Elizabeth I herself. The Virgin Queen was known for her obsessive control over court appearance, and she was extremely sensitive to odors. It was whispered that she could dismiss a lady-in-waiting for offending her nose, and that she demanded daily mouth rinses from those closest to her. To avoid disgrace, noble women kept private toilette cabinets, wooden chests containing herbs, paste, suckets, and scented cloths. Before entering court, they'd perform a ritual cleansing, scrubbing their tongues with linen strips, chewing parsley or angelica, and rinsing with rose vinegar. Some even rubbed their teeth with powdered coral or crushed pearls, not for hygiene, but to symbolize wealth and purity. And then came powdered breath pastille, small pressed lozenges made of honey, licorice, and spice designed to melt slowly. Apothecaries charged a fortune for gold-dusted varieties, reserved for the queen's favorites. The goal wasn't clean breath, it was perfumed breath, layered like their elaborate gowns. But no matter how carefully breath was managed, gossip traveled faster. Ladies who failed in their efforts were mocked in court poetry, their names turned into jokes about meat breath or ale stink. These whispers could poison reputations, making breath not just a personal matter, but a political liability. At the heart of the Elizabethan court stood a woman who defined an era, Queen Elizabeth I. Her image was everything, the glowing white face, the crimson lips, the towering wigs, and eyes that missed nothing. But beneath all the regal splendor, there was one unspoken truth. Elizabeth's own breath was not immune to the stench of her time, and she was known to go to extraordinary lengths to mask it. Let's begin with her infamous sweet tooth. Elizabeth I adored sugar. Candied violets, sugar-coated almonds, marzipan, and sugar-dusted suckets were her obsession. She drank sweetened wines and indulged in fruit conserves daily. But sugar, while delicious, was disastrous for her teeth. Contemporary accounts describe her with blackened teeth and even missing molars, especially in her later years. Foreign ambassadors often remarked with horror at the state of her mouth, though never in public. After all, insulting the queen could cost you your life. Her courtiers, however, took their cues from her. If the queen's teeth were black, black teeth became fashionable. Ladies began darkening their teeth with soot, lead powder, or burnt rosemary to mimic her appearance. It was considered a sign of wealth, proof that you could afford sugar. But black teeth came with a price: pain, decay, and overpowering bad breath. So how did Elizabeth, and the ladies who copied her, manage the smell? The queen had a private apothecary who prepared breath remedies, scented waters, and mouth powders for her exclusive use. One of her favorite recipes involved crushed pearls, white coral, sugar, and mint, ground into a fine powder and rubbed on the teeth and tongue with a cloth. The pearls didn't help her breath, but they represented purity, and rubbing them into her mouth was a symbolic purification ritual. Another of her favorite rinses was rosewater mixed with vinegar and honey, sometimes boiled with clove and cinnamon bark. This was swished, spat, and repeated before every public appearance. Elizabeth was terrified of foul breath, not because of health, but because it could shatter her carefully constructed image of eternal youth and divine favor. She also relied heavily on aromatic gloves. These weren't just fashion, they were scented with herbs and oils, including ambergris, civet, and musk. When the queen spoke, she'd hold a gloved hand close to her mouth, inhaling the scent and using it to cover her breath. The same strategy was used by her court ladies, who often wore multiple pairs of gloves, each soaked in different perfumes. Let's talk about Elizabeth's dental routines, because they were as intense as they were ineffective. She is known to have used toothpicks made from silver or ivory, often soaked in wine or herbal oils, to pick food from her teeth after meals. Some accounts even suggest she had tooth cleaning pastes made from burnt bread, crumbs, salt, and vinegar. which she would dab onto her teeth with a small cloth-wrapped stick. Her attendants, known as gentlewomen of the privy chamber, were tasked with ensuring her mouth remained presentable. That meant preparing pastille, stirring rinses, and sometimes even hand-feeding her suckets before important meetings. It was intimate, delicate, and relentless work, all to maintain the illusion of royal perfection. The queen also believed in the power of aromatic oils. She reportedly dabbed lavender oil on her gums and tongue, sometimes even chewing lavender buds for freshness. Other times she used mastic gum, a resin from the mastic tree, which when chewed released a piney, slightly sweet aroma. This was an ancient remedy dating back to Roman times, believed to freshen breath and strengthen gums. Elizabeth loved it, and so did her ladies. Now, let's zoom out to the culture of concealment that surrounded court ladies. Beyond just hiding bad breath, these women were trained to master the art of illusion. The entire court was a performance, where every movement, glance, and breath had to be calculated. Ladies were instructed to speak softly, not just as a sign of femininity, but to minimize the spread of breath. Speaking too loudly or laughing too heartily risked exposing one's scent, and by extension, one's hygiene. Conversation at court was often carried out through fans, veils, and scented kerchiefs, creating layers of scented barriers between mouths and noses. And yes, secret signals existed. If a lady suspected her breath had turned foul, she might touch her pomander 3 times or fan herself in a particular pattern to alert her maid or companion to bring fresh pastilles or herbs. These gestures became part of courtly language, understood only by insiders. There was also a social hierarchy of breath management. The wealthier and closer to the queen you were, the more access you had to rare spices, imported herbs, and perfumed mouth treatments. Lesser nobles had to make do with parsley, vinegar, or even charcoal. Some chewed licorice root or angelica, but the truly elite chewed on imported myrrh, ambergris, and expensive gums from the Mediterranean. And in the shadows, apothecaries thrived. They sold custom breath elixirs, some made with silver filings, opium and rose essence, others with rhubarb root, sage, and honey. Were they effective? Sometimes. Were they toxic? Often. But in a world where breath could destroy status, no price was too high. In Elizabethan England, breath was more than a sign of health. It was a symbol of your soul. The belief was simple yet terrifying. Sweet breath meant a pure heart, while foul breath hinted at sin, corruption, or even demonic influence. Yes, bad breath could be a moral failing, and for court ladies that meant constant fear, constant rituals, and constant judgment. Let's break this down. The concept of miasma, or bad air, dominated medical theory. People believed disease spread through foul smells, and if your breath stank, it meant your body was rotting from within. For a woman at court, whose entire worth could hinge on the queen's favor, or a nobleman's attention, even a whisper about foul breath could be ruinous. Enter the world of smell-based virtue policing. Elizabethan pamphlets, sermons, and poems often described immoral women as having stenching mouths and corrupt breaths. Prostitutes were said to reek of hell, and women accused of adultery were described as having sour tongues and poisoned breath. For a court lady, even the suggestion that her breath was unpleasant could be used to undermine her reputation, question her chastity, and erode her social standing. To combat this, ladies engaged in daily breath rituals, often in secret. Morning breath purification began with scraping the tongue, using thin metal tools, often made of silver, shaped like small spoons. This was followed by rinsing with wine, chewing aromatic herbs, and burning incense in private chambers. The goal? To exhale a sweet perfumed vapor, proving to all who encountered you that you were chaste, pure, and favored by heaven. Now, let's talk about public shaming, because yes, it happened. If a woman's breath became notoriously foul, and she was suspected of immorality or even witchcraft, her enemies could weaponize that smell. There were cases, documented in court records, of women accused of being witches or seductresses where testimony focused on their foul breath. In one 1593 case, a noble woman was accused of enchanting a courtier. The evidence? Her breath was like the grave, and her kisses sickened him. That's how breath became scandal, and scandal destroyed lives. This led to a market explosion in scented items. Pomanders, small metal orbs filled with fragrant herbs and resins, became essential accessories. Worn on chains or tucked into gloves, these were miniature defense systems shielding both wearer and those nearby from any perceived odor. Ladies would breathe through their pomander during conversation, creating the illusion of sweetness, even if their real breath was far from it. Let's dig into the recipes that kept the pomanders and mouths fresh. A classic Elizabethan breath cure involved powdered cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and sugar, bound together with rose water and musk oil, then shaped into small pastilles. These were chewed slowly, coating the mouth with scent. But they didn't just mask odors, they were status symbols. The rarer the ingredients, the higher your rank. Imagine this. A lady enters the court hall, trailing a faint aroma of ambergris and roses, her mouth lightly stained from chewing a spiced pastille. People take note, not just of her beauty, but of her virtue, her wealth, and her access to exotic goods. That scent was a silent signal, a social weapon, but not everyone could afford these luxuries. Poorer courtiers resorted to chewing parsley, fennel seeds, or rosemary sprigs. Some even used charcoal powder rubbed on the teeth and gums to absorb odors. It worked, but it left a grayish tint which could backfire. Darker gums were sometimes associated with illness or sorcery. And here's a strange but true practice. Breath fasting. Some ladies, terrified of smelling bad, would refuse to eat before social events, fearing that any food might spoil their breath. This led to fainting spells, which were often misinterpreted as delicate femininity. But in truth, many ladies were just starving and lightheaded, clinging to consciousness with a sprig of mint between their teeth. We must also mention the role of servants in this breath battle. Personal maids were often responsible for preparing herbal rinses, maintaining pomanders, and even discreetly warning their mistress if breath was turning foul. Some maids carried emergency breath bags, small pouches filled with mint leaves, cloves, and scented cloths, ready to be pressed to their ladies' lips in moments of need. There was also anxiety around kissing, especially during greetings or court dances. The double-cheek kiss, a common greeting, was often avoided if breath was suspect. Ladies might offer a hand instead, which was often scented with perfume or a pomander glove, allowing the other person to smell the glove, not the breath. This was more than hygiene. It was psychological warfare, and every court lady was both a player and a target. In the Elizabethan court, romance was political, marriage was strategy, and breath could make or break an alliance. That's right, halitosis was a deal-breaker even in the glittering halls of royalty. Let's dive into how bad breath influenced courtship, marriage, and power, and how some ladies resorted to alchemy, magic, and even poison in their desperate fight for fresh breath. First, the stakes. For a lady-in-waiting, a duchess, or even a queen, marriage wasn't about love. It was about land, wealth, and survival. But no matter how many titles you had, you still had to charm. And charm in Elizabethan England meant grace, wit, and pleasant company, which included pleasant breath, whispered conversations during feasts, long hours spent dancing in tight spaces, or intimate negotiations behind velvet curtains. Your breath was always under scrutiny. Some marriage contracts even included subtle references to the health and hygiene of the bride. Code for no visible disease, no offensive odor. One recorded rejection from a nobleman to a potential match noted that her sweetness was but in name, not in presence. Translation? She had bad breath, and that ended the alliance. So what did court ladies do? They took matters into their own hands, and sometimes into the realm of the occult. Let's start with physicians and alchemists. Court physicians offered breath elixirs, often based on mercury, camphor, or gold leaf dissolved in wine. These were incredibly dangerous, but advertised as purifiers of the breath and spirit. Some women drank them daily, despite the side effects, dizziness, nausea, and sometimes permanent damage to their teeth and gums. Then there were alchemical tablets, tiny pressed coins of silver, sulfur, and spices, believed to burn away inner corruption. One recipe advised melting silver shavings into honey, rolling it into pills, and sucking them slowly to sweeten the breath and the soul. Again, dangerous, expensive, and largely ineffective. But for a lady desperate to secure a suitor or retain favor, no price was too high. More mysterious were the magic breath spells. These often involved sleeping with a sprig of rosemary under the tongue, or wearing a sachet of angelica root over the heart. One popular spell involved burning myrtle leaves at dawn, inhaling the smoke, and reciting a charm that invoked Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of teeth, superstition blended with medicine, because at court appearances ruled all. Now, let's talk about poison, not for others, but for themselves. Some ladies used lead-based cosmetics that, over time, poisoned their gums and caused foul breath. Ironically, these same women would then use harsher treatments to combat the resulting odor, entering a cycle of decay and cover-up. Others drank vinegar tonics infused with arsenic or crushed pearls, believing these would cleanse the mouth from within. And when all else failed, deception. Some women hired breath stand-ins, servants or even actors who would speak for them in delicate situations, like negotiating with foreign envoys or receiving close gets. These proxies would whisper in their ear, then deliver the message aloud, shielding their mistress from exposure. For queens and nobles, architectural tricks helped. Scented air ducts, perfumed fountains, and lavender-stuffed tapestries created an environment where the air itself masked flaws. In Queen Elizabeth I's own chambers, rose and musk-infused rushes were scattered across the floors, and scented candles burned constantly. The Queen's obsession with roses wasn't just aesthetic, it was strategic. And what about the Queen herself? Queen Elizabeth I was known for chewing sweetened lozenges made from sugar, violet petals, and powdered pearls. These weren't just for show, they were her defense against court gossip. Letters describe how her attendants prepared morning breath rituals, including rosewater rinses and spiced tooth rubs, to ensure her breath never betrayed her. Because a queen's breath was political currency, it had to be sweet, powerful, and unquestioned. And finally, the legacy. Elizabethan breath rituals shaped how we think about oral hygiene today. The obsession with sweet-smelling mouths, the development of mouthwashes and breath mints, and even the social stigma around bad breath. All of it can be traced back to the perfumed corridors of Tudor England. Today, we brush, rinse, and chew gum. But in the past, court ladies risked death, scandal, and social exile, all for the illusion of a sweet breath. Because in the end, breath was power, and power in the Elizabethan court was everything.